All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Electronic Community Services Committee meeting on May 10th, 2022. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, committee members are practicing physical distancing and are participating electronically. Regional Chair Redmond, Councillor Foxton, Councillor Jowett, and I are present in the council chambers. I'm going to call on Julie Hale to conduct the roll call.
Thank you. Regional Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Chair Clark.
Present.
Councillor Jowett.
Present.
Councillor Erb.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor McGarry. Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
And we have regrets from Councillor Lorenz and Councillor Galloway. Councillor Vanabek will join later in the day. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. The land we're on is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. It reminds us that we share these resources and we need to protect them. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, there are no presentations. We have no delegations. We're on to the consent agenda items. If you wish to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless they're requested to be removed to the regular agenda. The items listed on the consent agenda will be dealt with in one motion. Are there any items that you wish to have removed from the consent agenda? And I'm seeing none. We'll now vote to approve the consent agenda items. Do I have a mover? Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Kiefer. Please use your yes or no buttons to vote. And that's carried. Thank you. Item 8.1, strategic. Oh, so these are the consent agenda. Sorry. By the time I finish my second term, I will get used to these agendas. The regular agenda items, strategic focus, responsive and engaging public service. This is for information. We do have a staff presentation. Stephen Van Valkenburg, the Chief of Paramedic Services, who will provide the presentation. Chief?
Good morning, and thanks, Chair. And good morning, councillors. So I'm here to present the 2021 performance report. Okay, so we're doing the presentation. Okay, good. So this is a update on performance for paramedic services. We distributed the 2021 performance report in the packages, and I can certainly answer any questions with that. But when we were completing the 2021 performance report, we noticed that there were some trends that we wanted to further investigate. So we decided that we should take a look at the first quarter of 2022 to see how the trends were going. So this is a presentation on sort of what's going on from January of 22 to the end of March 22. So next slide, please. So for call volume, the key messages from this slide really is, there's a lot of information here, is that the 2020 growth shifted to 2021, and our vehicle response are now forecast to grow at 7%. And from the report, there was a 10% increase last year in call volume, and we're expecting another 7% in 2022. And the growth in 2022 will certainly be above the 5-year average that you can see to the far right. We're expecting sorry, just have to move something on my slide here. We're expecting about 68,000 calls in 2022. Next slide, please. So we talk a lot about unit utilization within the performance report and our updates for this. And you can see there 2019, 20, and 21, those are average year utilizations. What you can see to the far right is 2022, that we're running at 51.6, almost 52%. And that's on a continual basis. That's not just a peak. That's actually on a daily basis where we're hitting almost 52%. Ambulances are now actively engaged in calls more than half of each hour and well above the recommended threshold of 35%. Above this threshold, it becomes difficult to ensure ambulance availability for the next call in a reasonable time frame, and it's an unsustainable level for staff. Staff are running from call to call, and it's starting to have impact on staff when they have missed lunches. They're running overtime at the end of their shift. So it's starting to show more and more from a staff perspective as well. Next slide, please. This is just a graphical representation, and you've seen this graph many times in the past. What it shows in the dark black line are unit utilization, and the ambulances, the little icon for ambulances is how many ambulances we added in what year from 2015 onward. And what you can see is we added the 3 ambulances approved by council in 2021. And typically, when we add the ambulances, we see a bit of a decrease in the unit utilization. Last year, it did not have that effect whatsoever. And you can see that it's climbing quite high, and it's sitting over 50% right now for 2022. And so the 12-month moving average for unit utilization, 45.2%, is trending up from an already unsustainable level, which is significantly above the 35% master plan benchmark. And unit utilization was 52.3% in March of 2022. Next slide, please. And so this may look familiar. This is a graph that was taken out of our master plan that was done in the updates for 2019. And what we can see is that we're starting to trend on the red line, which is the update high volume, versus the green, which is the update low. So by the end of the year, we're certainly going to be tracking on the update high line from within the master plan. Excuse me. The next slide, please. So the key messages from this presentation is, when compared with our master plan, it appears we're growing our call volume faster than the low growth scenario and aligning more with the projected high growth scenario. And in the master plan, the low growth scenario was about 4.9%, the high was 5.9%. And given that we had a 10% increase last year, we're certainly tracking well above that. Our unit utilization continues to rise despite council investment, and it's reached an unsustainable level of staff deployment, and it's become difficult to ensure an ambulance will be available for the next call in a reasonable time frame. In spite of the 3 new 12-hour ambulance shifts were added in July 21, additional resources more in line with the higher end estimates of resource needs from the master plan would be needed to ensure that the service can continue to respond effectively to the community needs. Offload delay will not be solved in any expedited manner. Offload delays are caused by deep-rooted systemic healthcare issues, and local paramedic services do not have an ability to impact offload delay. While we continue advocacy with provincial partners, call volumes will continue to grow regardless of offload delay, and paramedic services will be require continued investment in resources to keep up with the demand. Increasing call volumes are due to population growth and aging demographics. Next slide, please. So going forward, paramedic services is losing ground on achieving our council-approved master plan goals. Our call volumes are now tracking in line with the high growth scenario, adding further pressure to an already stressed system and staff. Council has been following the master plan for the low growth scenario, with the exception of 2020, when we temporarily reduced the utilization target from 35 to 37.5%, resulting in 3 less 12-hour ambulances being added to the deployment model. Since then, call volumes and unit utilization have continued to grow. Paramedic Services continues to review our current data and trends with our performance indicators, and planning to bring back forward a 2023 budget ask to align with the master plan high growth scenario resourcing requirement. Last slide, please. So the budget implications for what we've just discussed. So based on our current data and trending experience, we're estimating that the region will require, on the operational side of things, 11 12-hour ambulances with supporting staff, and that's approximately 55 paramedics to staff those ambulances, associated operational staffing to support the new staff and service requirements to ensure compliance with current legislative requirement. That would be 10 full-time equivalents. A new 12-hour shift to be phased in. Sorry, the new 12-hour shifts to be phased in, details to follow. Annualized expenditure of approximately $10 million. Levy impact based on 50% cost sharing is about $5 million. On the capital side of that equation is 11 ambulances and 3 spares and 1 emergency response unit, coming in at about $4.6 million, funding and financing to be determined. Timing of delivery is subject to supply chain issues and production delays. We can certainly talk more about that. And we may need to keep existing ambulances on the road beyond end of life, and that's because of supply chain issues. So staff will bring forward recommendations regarding how to operationalize this request in a future staff report. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Chief, for being the bearer of bad news bravely. I do see some questions, not surprisingly, but in a nutshell, we've been working on a low-growth scenario. We have not been in a low-growth scenario, so not only do we have to do more in 2023 than our master plan assumed, but we have some catching up to do as well. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. I had the privilege of sitting at a pre-budget announcement at which they said the province was going to fund nurses at Emerge to take care of the offload. Now, the offload has a huge impact, so it'll be interesting to see, number one, if the budget goes through, and number two is if this program is brought forward to find out what kind of assistance that will be for us. Doesn't answer all our problems, but it probably will certainly help.
Thanks, Councillor Fox. And staff, I see nods. Do you have any comments?
So through the chair, so thank you for that, Councillor Fox. And yes, the province has talked about adding some additional staffing for the offload nurse programs within the hospitals. And we welcome that, and they're trying some other things to try and solve the offload delay issue. The Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs is actually currently working on a 2-page document that's going to be going out to the government and the parties as well to discuss offload delay issue. And it's really, the focus is on the patient first, and the delays in any patient care that might come because we're stuck in offload delay. There's a whole bunch of things. We'll certainly share that with council when that becomes public. My concern is that, and I think I've said to council in the past that you can give me $10 million, I can't solve offload delay because I don't have anywhere to put the patients. It's a systemic issue in the hospitals. It's a flow issue. There's just no room in the hospital. So while we welcome the money, and we'll certainly do our best with whatever money they give us or to the hospitals and work with them for that, I'm not overly confident that that's going to solve the offload issue.
Councillor Foxton? You good? Okay. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I was just going to talk about offload delay too, and the impact. I know we talk about it every year, and it's very frustrating, but that conversation was fine. That answered my question. Thanks.
Chair Redmond?
Thank you very much. I just want to echo your comments, Chair Clark, that this is a disturbing but brave report. And I guess in addition to the offload delays and what the province will or won't do, I'm very supportive of looking at how we resolve our attraction issues and our retention issues. And a lot of these unanswered questions and sort of the utilization of the ambulances indicates to me that this also not only tracks the service that we can give our residents, but also the working conditions for paramedics. So, Chief, thank you very much for bringing this forward, and I look forward to figuring out how we resolve this.
Councillor Erb?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Chief Falkenberg, for the this report and just the awareness of the challenges that we're facing of an aging and a growing population, and coming out of the COVID, where people are probably more willing to be calling for an ambulance to go to a hospital. I'm wondering if you could help me understand the 35%. I think that was on about the second or third slide of your presentation. Just a little bit more detail. Maybe everybody else understands what that's all about, but I'm not quite clear.
So through the chair, so thank you, Councillor Erb. So when we talk about the unit utilization, really it's just, when we boil it down, it's a unit, it's a measure of busyness. And the sort of industry standard is anything above 40% is unsustainable. 30 to 35 is the typical range of a paramedic service that will make sure that you have an ambulance available. Anything under 30%, you're really running a high performance EMS system, from an international standpoint. So 35 is the benchmark that was set within the master plan, and that's what we've been aiming for over the last few years to try and get to. So that's why we keep referencing the 35%.
And is that 35% based on an hour, or like what's the measurement that's used to base it on?
Correct. So it's the amount of time that they're tied up every hour. So right now, our unit utilization is a little over 30 minutes of every hour. An ambulance is actually tied up doing a call. So all the other things that they have to do outside of that have to be within that other 28 minutes or so. So lunches, breaks, traveling, doing standbys, things like that have to get absorbed into that other piece.
Okay, thank you. I thought that's what it was, but I just wanted to be clear. Thanks for clarifying that.
Councillor McGarry.
And through you, Chair, it is a sobering report, no doubt. Chief, I was wondering about what the community could do and if there are other ways that communities can support trying to actually reduce calls for service. And the thing that comes to mind for me is the frequent calls for overdoses in the community. Do you have a breakdown about how many calls for service for overdoses happened in the last year?
So through the chair, so yes, we do report to the RIDS and the opioid strategy program, so we can certainly get that data. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. We can do that. I just don't actually have it in front of me. But it wouldn't be, of the 68,000 responses that we do every year, it's not a vast majority of them.
Okay, because I note that when some of the discussions around consumption and treatment services in the Waterloo region is being discussed, that we're looking at the number of overdoses that are in the community, and the number is fine to get later, but also how many are being prevented when there are services outside the hospital. And that's just one example. So I think that, when you're looking at prevention and trying to reduce calls for service, you have to look at the overall component of community safety. And that would be, if the community sort of followed traffic signals, for instance, and we were able to reduce perhaps some of the issues around speeding through our communities, cyclists and pedestrians being hit, other ways that we can manage to try and prevent some of the overdoses that we see in our community. Any calls for service that we in the community can reduce, I think, is helpful. I also have been part of the program before where there were nurses to accept patients to prevent some of the offload delays and get the paramedics back on track again. And it has been tried in the province, but if I remember correctly, there are some hospitals that don't have the space to be able to take a patient offloading from the ambulance and put that patient in a bed, and then to have a space where you could safely monitor the patient. So experience here in Waterloo region, do you feel that that program would be adequate at least to offload a few patients, noting that it does take quite a lot of room in order to be able to put patients with things like call bells and oxygen and, monitoring capability with some of the patients that you bring in?
Yeah, so through the chair, so very good points and valid points, and thanks for that. So offload delay, just as a sort of a little bit of history. So we've been dealing with offload delay for almost 17 years within the province of Ontario. They put a Band-Aid solution on it, which was the offload nurse program. Back in 2005 to 7, they started that program, and it's continued since. And there was only 14 original municipalities that had that funding. It is since spread out to most municipalities, and they're actually putting some more money on the table for offload nurse programs because it's hitting smaller and smaller hospitals all the time. So the offload nurse program really is a Band-Aid solution on a leaking aorta. So, it's not going to hold. I wouldn't want to speak for the hospitals because I certainly don't have a space capacity program in my head that would figure out how many they could actually do. They might be able to expand that program a little bit more, but like every other healthcare issue, they probably have staffing and HHR issues, the same as everyone else does in healthcare. And I'm not sure if they can get the nurses or the space, but we would certainly work with our hospitals for sure to make sure that if there's additional funding that's available and we can get the space to increase the number of patients that are being held in offload delay, that we would do that. The sad part of that equation is that once those beds get filled by patients coming in the door, the offload program, we're still doing hallway medicine. We need a program that's sustainable to get the patients from the ED up to the floor, the patients from the floor out to ALC beds in the community or back home or discharged. And there's certain other programs that the province has been working on to help that out, but it's definitely a systemic health issue, and paramedic services has come to the table over the years to try and resolve this issue, but I guess enough's enough. We, as municipalities and paramedic services, cannot solve this problem. The province needs to come to the table and fix it.
Thank you. And, my final comment is it's far more complex than meets the eye. And I think you spoke very well to that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Harris?
You said Harris?
Yes.
Good morning, Chief. Thanks for your presentation. And unfortunately, 17 long years here, we're facing a very similar reality each and every day in our region. Chief, I'm a big proponent of the dispatching system. I'm wondering, I know we've not chatted for a while on that. I know that there were some changes with regards to the provincial dispatch center being relocated to Hamilton for a short period of time. I'm just wondering if you could perhaps give us a bit of an update. I know you're working perhaps still with a working group, or hopefully you are, and how those changes are coming, and how we've worked through some issues with the dispatch and how that relates and impacts, frankly, our regional ambulance service.
Right, through the chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Harris. I'd be happy to give you an update on that. So I do still sit on the Provincial Ambulance Dispatch Implementation Committee through the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs, and that's the committee that's overseeing the implementation of the Medical Priority Dispatch System, MPDS, which is the new triage system within the province of Ontario. I am happy to report that after an almost 3-year delay, they are going live in November, as of right now anyway, in the Mississauga Ambulance Communication Center. They've been busy in the background upgrading the CAD systems, the dispatch systems, to a new version of software that's required for the MPDS. And that's also going to give us access to some real-time information that I've been lobbying and asking the government for, to create some dashboards for real-time monitoring within the systems. In terms of the Cambridge Dispatch Center, they did temporarily move to Hamilton, and they have been back. And they are still functioning in Cambridge. I haven't been made aware of any issues within the dispatch center for that, and there's certainly no, I'll say, rumor or innuendo that the government has any eye on consolidating dispatch centers or reducing the number of dispatch centers at this particular time, but that's always subject to government approval and discussion. We've had no issues with Cambridge CAG since they've moved back. or for that matter, when they were down in Hamilton as well, the government actually did a fairly good job of doing that transition and not having interruption in service. So, in of any kind of consolidation or downloading, there's been absolutely no discussion from a provincial perspective that they're looking at or willing to download the dispatch centers. Our particular center in Cambridge is scheduled for the MPDS, but it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years at least before they look at that. And I guess I'll say the disappointing thing in that is that if we had the new triage system, that would certainly give us some capacity within the system to defer some of the lower priority calls and retain some of our ambulances, because the current system doesn't do that. It's not specific enough. So most of the calls, 70 to 80% of the calls that are received through 911 go out as an emergency call. Whereas if you had MPDS and it was configured correctly, it should be about 40% of the time. So we go screaming out lights and siren, and a lot of the time, only about 10% of our calls come back as an emergency, and then they sit in offload anyway. So, you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Chief. And I'm wondering, Chair, I know our region's done an excellent job, frankly, especially with Chief's participation at some of these roundtables and working groups, that we could make this somewhat of a provincial or regional priority when the election's over and a new government, whoever that might be, is in place. Is there an opportunity where we could action perhaps a letter from our chair or council advocating for the MPDS? I mean, it's just on record as being, a game changer, frankly, and I think that's an added benefit. And I don't know if there's an action item here that we could, without a vote, just kind of send a letter off after the new government's elected with, I'm sure, regional priorities, and this should be included as one. And I'm hoping you can consider doing that.
I am seeing Chair Redmond nodding, and I think this is certainly within our purview and appropriate. And I will let Chair Redmond's office look after that. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for your time. And thank you to all your members out there, working day in and day out on behalf of our community. They work hard. It's a thankless position, and we appreciate all of their efforts for sure.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris.
Councillor Shantz?
Yeah, thank you. Just sort of tagging on to what Councillor Harris was talking about. And first I'll say I had need to call the ambulance some months ago, and they were so wonderful, very professional, and had good response time, good response. So thank you for everything. My question was, clearly this is a provincial issue, but I wonder how we compare to other municipalities in terms of our issues with offload delay and connections with the hospital. I think particularly in our advocacy for another hospital, and want to ensure that all the pieces are included in that advocacy. Have you been working with the hospitals on that piece?
So through the chair, I do make contact with the hospitals regularly about offload delay, and actually we formed a committee within the hospital. It's for patient destination guidelines. So again, I'll take you back a little bit. When COVID started, we have a software program here called First Watch, and I worked with that company, and we created a First Watch COVID bed board so that we could actually see the distribution of COVID or presumed COVID positive patients to the hospitals. And it would actually measure their ICU capacity, their in-hospital bed capacity, and their ED capacity, and it changed colors and flashed, etc. It was all fancy. But it was a rudimentary board that we could actually use to distribute patients for COVID or presumed COVID positive patients so that we wouldn't get caught in offload delay. Remembering that call volumes were down at the first of the pandemic as well, and people weren't going into the ED. And it actually worked quite well, but unfortunately, over the last couple of years, it's morphed into this destination protocol within the hospitals, and it doesn't work for that. It's not designed for that. So we're currently working with updating and creating some kind of a patient destination hospital board so that we can figure out where we can send crews and patients so that we don't get caught in offload delay. So that's just one program that we're sort of working in the background on. provincially, I'm actually happy to say that we are nowhere near the top of offload delay within the province of Ontario. And that's actually a good statement for us, but a sad statement for the other services. Hamilton and Niagara, Toronto, they're really strapped with offload delay. This is a provincial problem that's seeping out to all hospitals within the province. London's actually in bad shape as well on the offload delay. And unfortunately, with the COVID pandemic and our issues within the hospitals and services, is just continuing to compound and morph into more issues as we go forward. There is advocacy, as I said, from the Ontario Association of Paramedics of doing a 1 or 2 page position paper on the offload delay and asking the government to take more action on that. And it will be published shortly, and it will certainly be shared with council. And I'm hoping that at some point I can bring that back and actually get a letter of support to go back to the new government when it's formed to take some action on the offload delay issues.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Councillor Foxton, I apologize. I should have come to you earlier. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. No apology necessary, Chair. Chair Redmond, are you going to AMO? Right now, the list for delegations to AMO is going out. AMO's in August, which is after the election. So maybe we should take a brief to AMO in regards to this. And Chief, that would mean we would need a few points to present in that brief on your behalf, on the ambulance services behalf, and that we can physically meet with the minister and present them with the briefs and have a discussion.
Yeah, so through the chair, so that's good. That's great news to know, because I was going to be having a discussion in a little bit about that. So the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs has done a position paper exactly for that, for AMO, for municipalities to take, and so I will be sharing that as well with the chair and the CAO to have the discussion piece within AMO, and obviously the offload delay paper will be done at that time too. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Welcome.
All right, I do have a couple of questions myself, and they're really follow-up to my colleagues' questions. And I will start with Councillor Harris's question around the dispatch system. I understand why the dispatch system changes to it would help us in our response times. I'm not clear how it would help us with unit utilization. Is it simply because we would be able to, say, respond to not what we judge to be a non-emergency call outside of our code yellow period, or is there something else that I'm missing?
Yeah, so great question. So the MPDS system, the Medical Priority Dispatch System, it's a very complex triage system. So within that system, it's about what they call determinants. So that's, if you call in and say you're having chest pain, for example, there's a whole bunch of determinants as to why you're having that chest pain. So did somebody punch you? Somebody hit you with something? Are you having actual chest pain, a heart-related chest pain in terms of a heart attack or whatever? And there's 2,000 of those determinants from all the different medical conditions when you call in. And with each one of those determinants, there's a priority assigned to each one of those determinants. It can range from emergent to non-urgent. And then therefore, because it has a much finer approach to the way it triages the calls, it doesn't send out all our ambulances on emergency calls. So we retain vehicles to respond to those other low priority calls when the timing is correct. So yes, we would match that with our deployment plan to say, if we were in code yellow or any other color that we would want to have, we would say we won't respond to those calls until such time as we have X number of vehicles available, so that we don't jeopardize the ability to respond to those high priority calls, therefore reducing that utilization and the overuse of our vehicles for non-emergency calls.
That makes sense. Thank you. And my second question, Councillor McGarry did reference frequent callers. And I recall a few years ago, we talked about our community paramedicine program as maybe one way to deal with that. I wonder if you can just really briefly update us on that program and what impact you think it might have had.
Great, thanks for the question. And we will be bringing a report to committee probably in the fall, just to update on the community paramedic program. We did receive the funding for the long-term care funding, which is treating folks that are awaiting admission into long-term care, and we're currently under hiring process for those community paramedics to go out and do that. The community paramedic program does look at frequent callers, and it looks at people that might be abusing the system and calling multiple times a day. But the only caveat I would say to that is that out of all the responses we do, those are not like huge numbers, right? So, even if we can get one person to stop calling 3 times a day, that's great news. And it's good news for the patient because, we're looking after their needs as well. They're not calling 911. But the number of calls that we're actually reducing through that is not substantial enough to impact some of the issues we're discussing. But it is a valuable program, both for us and for the community.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that report. I see no other questions, so colleagues, you're on notice that we're probably going to have this discussion again sooner rather than later, given the urgency and the supply chain issues that we're dealing with. So I believe we'll be hearing more.
Thank you.
All right. That was our regular agenda item. There is no information or correspondence. Is there any other business? I have 2 screens to check. Councillor Erb.
I'm not sure what the protocol is here on the items that were on the consent agenda, but I was slow getting my computer on, and I just wanted to make a comment on one if I could. And is that in order?
I'm going to say it is. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. On the emergency shelter that has been brought forward, to me, this report and the one on the housing master plan are just 2 indications of how staff are working and how creative they are in trying to solve our housing and our shelter system. And particularly this shelter system report, where they are meeting with other service providers regularly in the region to gain input on how we can solve some of the problems. And I think some of the recommendations in here are very significant. They obviously have a budget impact going forward, but very, very significant in addressing the long-term needs of shelter care. And, from the very beginning to try and extend the operations of the St. Andrews and the Y, but some new ones that are important with looking at the possibility of creating a permanent shelter location. Every fall, staff work tirelessly to find shelter locations and extend shelter locations like we're doing at St. Andrews and the Y, which takes up a significant amount of time. And so if we can create some spaces that are permanent for shelter spaces, I think it's so important. The possibility of a second interim housing site similar to the one that's on University Avenue right now, staff are going to be working at. Ownership of buildings that the region might own or purchase, or however we would acquire them, that we have some permanency for these things as well. And of course, the key again is lobbying the provincial government to get more funding, but the funding that we had for the COVID is extended. So some of these recommendations I think are very significant in moving us forward in how we want to deal with the shelter system on a long-term basis. We're putting some stability into it, and staff then would be able to direct their time and efforts to other issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis. So thanks for your indulgence, Madam Chair. I just want to acknowledge all the work that staff and our community partners have been putting into this. And now I see Mr. Dyer put on his, he's going to talk to the budget implications.
Mr. Dyer or Mr. Lochner, would you? Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks for those comments, Councillor Erb. Just to reinforce for Council, on both the shelter report and the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan report, I can't emphasize enough the significance of both of these items from a future cost perspective. Both capital and operating. And I've spoken many times to this committee and to council about the pressure that the municipal tax levy is under here at the region, and the expectations of us as a service provider, as a service manager, as a funder are all increasing and are just putting immense pressure on our budgets going forward. And so I think the notion of continued advocacy to the provincial and federal governments in particular is absolutely essential. And I think in future reports, as individual items come forward for approval and review, I think that's the time for this council to take a really close look at what we're getting into, what we're looking at funding from the property tax base relative to all of the other priorities that council has in its strategic plan. So I think we'll come back with more detailed recommendations on individual items in the future, but hopefully that bigger picture context is helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. And thanks, Councillor Erb. I will take the opportunity to just add that I think the community sometimes forgets that we are not a service provider. We are a service manager, which means our work is planning and partnering with the many, many different organizations and groups that actually do the work. And that takes time. And I personally find it very frustrating when I hear our staff criticized for taking too long to do something when it's simply not the context that we work in. Things have to be negotiated. They have to be budgeted for, and it does take longer than it would if we were directly providing services. I see no other business. Our next meeting is June 14th, 2022. We're going to adjourn. However, I'm not sure when we're going to resume because I think we might have delegations coming up next. Yeah. We could probably do about 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. So I will take a vote to adjourn.